Well, we'll just start, and I'll start by thanking you all for attending this session, also thanking the organization at South Summit for this lovely invite, and thank you, Kate and Ion, for also participating in this panel. But maybe I would start just by asking you, maybe you first, Kate, and then Ion, to talk a little bit about your organization, what you guys do, and what problem you're trying to solve.
Great, thank you, and thanks for having us. So at Overstory, we use satellites and apply artificial intelligence to it to help electric utilities prevent wildfires, prevent power outages, and then also protect biodiversity. So, and our focus is purely on the vegetation intelligence, and we're from space able to tell you down here in Spain, which we've had the good fortune to do, exactly what that tree is, where your eucalyptus is on the ground, and what its health is, species, height, proximity to infrastructure, which is really a game changer because we can now do this at scale.
Thank you.
I have an announcement. As promised, we are honoured to be joined now by the Deputy Prime Minister for Ecological Transition at the Government of Spain. Please give a very warm welcome to Teresa Ribera. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah. And I was just at the beginning asking to introduce your organization and what is the number one problem you're trying to solve? I'm sure you have more than one, but do you want to introduce what are you doing as a Deputy Prime Minister in the ecological transition, and what's the number one problem or the problems you're trying to address?
Okay, so thank you so much for the question, who I am and what I do. I am the Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge and the Deputy Prime Minister of the government. What we intend to do, we intend to transform things, so to ensure that human prosperity can take place within the limits of the planet, and to reduce the gap, the divide, the increasing gap between those living very well and those living not so well, including the divide between the urban and rural areas that sometimes provoke the sentiment of being second-row citizens and second-class citizens, which is not a good thing in democratic terms, not only in terms of fairness and equity, when people living in rural areas think that they don't have access to the same type of services and the same type of facilities. So those are my challenges, how we can transform prosperity, development in a way that is much more sound, much more sustainable, so mainly dealing with land, energy and water. That mean biodiversity, food security, capacity to invest and to produce prosperity and welfare at home and at the economic level. So thinking about society.
Thank you, Teresa. Jon, and do you want to talk a bit about how
Sure.
about WeGo and the problem you're trying to solve?
So my name is Jon Padilla. I'm the CEO of WeGo. Basically what we do is that we process satellite data with machine learning to monitor environmental variables that are key for clean energy. So if we take a simple example, if we take a hydropower dam, for example, what we would be doing is monitoring the snow that is in the mountains, the water that flows from the rivers, the water that are on the lakes, so that we can create, we give this information to energy producers so that they can be more efficient, they can create more energy without investment in infrastructure, and we help into reducing the market volatility. If I take a little bit, the main challenge that we're facing, and I think we're helping both energy producers and governments, is that currently when we're looking at energy transition, moving from classic fossil fuel-based solutions that are really easy to forecast, right? So if we have 1 kilogram of coal, and I ask you how many megawatts we can create out of there, it's pretty simple. 1 kilogram of coal equals X megawatts, right? But if I tell you, okay, so how much water, wind, or sun we'll have tomorrow? Well, that question is still unanswered. And this is fundamentally the question that we're trying to give an answer through WeGo. And we do this using satellite data by monitoring these key environmental variables, water, wind, sun, and helping these energy producers, government, into ensuring that they understand the energy production that is going to be taken tomorrow, and they can avoid shortages, and obviously we can help them transition finally to a net zero or greener economy.
Thank you. This is a good start. I think we're going to have a really good conversation. And for you, Teresa, the ecological transition is an imperative for our planet, for our societies. And can you give some examples of projects that you are working at the ministry that will impact specifically the Spanish community and Spanish society?
Okay, so in the broad picture, I would say that there are three main lines to take and things that we are promoting and trying to facilitate how to fix things. One of them is, of course, how we move from a fossil fuel-based energy system towards something that is not so much centralized, much more sophisticated, also much more local, and taking into consideration the renewable energy capacities, being very efficient, much more affordable and smart. So how we can create the conditions to change, and in this shift, how we can ensure that this does not create any additional social concern or exclusion. So how we can ensure that this is fair when walking the path. The second thing I would say is how we can ensure that we are smart when tackling with biodiversity and natural resources. How we can protect, restore, how we can learn, how we can ensure, and how we can make a much more connected green infrastructure and being inspired by biodiversity and ecosystems, so to be much more resilient to the climate impacts, how we can ensure that we can afford and we can face the challenges around water scarcity, water floods or water stress, what additional water we can produce, how we can be much more smart when transporting and using water, and how we can ensure, again, this fairness consideration when tackling water. And the third thing is how we can promote a much more smart way to produce and consume. How we can ensure that the way we produce is much more effective and takes into consideration the materials that we had been using before, so that we do not waste so much beyond what we can afford in planetary terms, but at the same time how we can invest in new materials, how we can create a new culture, how we can facilitate a mindset, a common cultural approach that takes into consideration that there are many things that we are doing up to now that are not wise and that produce additional risk that in fact we do not want to be in a position to be facing. So how we can assess risk and value in a very different manner. And the main thing to get that, and that's a common comment that probably goes beyond your question, is how we can ensure that these are shared goals in general terms by the society, and how we can pay attention and listen to each other so to create an appropriate puzzle that takes into consideration all the different sensitiveness, but going towards the same type of horizon. So sharing the idea on what we want to achieve. And this is very much connected to public awareness, education, and values and culture. So there are some things that need to happen to break inertias that go beyond a strict traditional regulation or technology solutions, are much more social and much more linked to values.
Thank you. Talking about technology solutions, Kate, you help utilities in Europe, but mainly in the US, to make smarter decisions. You help them to prevent wildfires. Can you share a bit with us why are those utility companies choosing Overstory versus other options that they have been using or they are looking to use in the future? Why Overstory?
Absolutely, thank you. So we're finding, I mean, we have actually Europe, we're based out of Amsterdam, and we do work in Europe and the US, and our first, one of our first big customers was actually Red Electrica here in Eloit, and I think our work with them shows also why we're being selected, which is with Eloit and Red Electrica, we use our machine learning models and satellites to detect 37 different vegetation species over 16,000 kilometers of territory. And so this helps with biodiversity protection, this helps with wildfire prevention, and really what separates us from the other players that are using similar remote sensing technology in artificial intelligence is the quality, the accuracy of those insights. And so whether we're helping utilities in northeastern United States prevent outages, or also we help with work plan management to reduce their operating expenses, or it's helping prevent wildfires and protecting biodiversity. It's that underlying kind of vegetation intelligence that matters, and then how do you make that actionable for that customer so they can really make it meaningful for their objectives.
Thank you. And talking again, continuing about technology and helping corporations to make smarter decisions. We were talking about this before we joined the panel, that we talk a lot about utilities, energy, electricity. Probably there is not enough talk or as much talk about water. Do you want to share a bit with us in the same lines as Kate did about why what you are doing and how WeGo is helping your clients to make smarter decisions around water and snow?
Sure. So this is a big problem, right? Water scarcity, and specifically in countries like Spain, that we don't only consume water, but we produce energy out of it, right? So it's critical that the water cycles are preserved. Now, when it comes to climate change, we know that these cycles are going to change, right? They are going to evolve and change, and all of our infrastructure is designed to hold this water in the previous water cycle, right? So what we do in WeGo is that we're able to monitor the humidity, the water levels that are on the soil, the amount of snow that there is in the mountains, the amount of water that there is on the lakes, and we can create historical data sets in a whole country to understand how these dynamics are changing over time. And they are doing, right? Surprise, they are doing. So in previous years, we'll have that the melting season, when snow will melt, will happen all at the same time in the same month. So if here in the Pyrenees, it's usually around May, June. If we go to the Alps, it's maybe June, July, right? But all the melting of snow will happen in the same month. Now with climate change, this is going to change. So the melting of the snow, it's going to be way more dynamic. We'll have flash floods that are going to arrive. We will have lots of different activities that will happen that our infrastructure is not prepared to handle. Now, to give like a small example, we're working with the government of New Zealand because they are heavily invested in hydropower. They want to go net zero. And obviously what happened is that as we're investing so much in hydropower, and if we don't have the intelligence to know when that snow will arrive into our lakes, we can get into shortage situations. And what happened in New Zealand is that last year they smashed their record in coal consumption, right? So that means if we don't have the right technology to monitor the water that then is going to be used for tap water, for sanitary water, for hydropower, and we invest too heavily in renewable energy without doing our homework first, we can create the opposite, and we start burning coal, right? So these are the kind of situations that we try to avoid by having better systems to monitor water.
Random question off script. Are you working with the government of Spain or just New Zealand?
Not yet.
Okay, we can talk after the panel. And Kate, you guys have different solutions, and potentially you might have the same client in some situations. And there are other solutions out there, maybe here in the audience, but definitely out there. And this means that if I'm a utility company, I might be working with 10, 15 solutions to help me with my needs. What are your thoughts about making it easier for, whether it's a ministry or entities at the ministry level or utilities, to make things more interoperable and work with each other, so the decisions also can be really smarter at a larger scale?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I know we're in this business because we want to have an impact, and the intelligence that we're capturing, we want it to be more open source, and so that whether it's governments or emergency management providers and utilities, we're all able to kind of start building better systems. I mean, when I hear about the challenges the minister's trying to tackle, it's overwhelming. But then when I think about the technologies that we all have, imagine if we were able to really have a smart, efficient, open platform where we can really be sharing this data in a way that still enables our businesses to grow. And so I've seen this in particular with the wildfire prevention area. There are, huge data catalogs, but it's for, a utility, for example, or even for governments to try to make sense of it and figure out which sources are the right ones to put together. It's a real challenge. And so like GitHub and open source and software has been such a dynamic, powerful tool. And I've seen now this actually start to develop in energy and power systems. There's LF Energy Foundation that is making a lot of these, a lot of open source interoperable software tools for the grid. And my hope is that we'll be able to do this with the type of data that we're collecting so that we can really all be part of this solution together.
And what about you, Jon? Just would like to hear your perspective as well, how you are seeing your product maybe interconnecting with other products, specifically, and what you do, how might that be helping with forecasting, as you're mentioning, and preventing shortages and relating to other dependencies that your clients have?
Yeah, so this is quite critical as well. So something that we're doing, and this comes into, what would I say, like the buttons that sort of like a country should have when it comes to water management and energy management. What we do, I thought it was not working, yeah. So what we're doing actually is that, for example, this is something that we're now doing in Switzerland, is that Switzerland is a country that depends a lot in hydropower, right? They have a lot of super big dams. The main energy is produced through those dams, and those dams are used to funnel ski stations, agriculture, so they are critical, right? So what we're able to do is that we monitor all the top, I think it is top 20 lakes of Switzerland to know the total volume of water that is available. So that is what we call active water. So this means water that can be used today. And then we monitor in those same lakes, in the same catchment area, we monitor the snow that is in the mountains. And this is what we call reserve water, right? So this is water that is going to be converted in the future, and then it's going to be available. So then we sum both, and basically this is all the water that you have to run the country for a full year, right? So what we do is that since we have historical data sets in which we are comparing to previous years how much snow or water we have in previous years, we can give this data to the government so that basically the government can pick up the phone, call the energy producers or the lake operators and say, hey, we need to hold horses, we're running into a shortage situation, and we like to maintain the integrity of our water and our lakes for the time being, right? These are, of course, critical situations, but it's really important to have this data because many organizations, they don't have this data. And without this data, you're pretty much running a water system in your country completely blind. So yeah, these are the kind of integrations that we're trying to do. Obviously, these are critical information as well for grid operators in hydropower-based countries, but it's as well critical information for the government and for the energy producers.
So we talked a lot about data in your answers, and I'm sure Teresa has access to a lot of data. And your ministry is developing a lot of projects that contribute to a greener, safer, ecological transition. I did some homework. I saw things about digitalization of the water cycles, meteorological surveillance of to monitor climate change, development of smart grids to monitor the coastal erosion, etc., etc., etc. I have a two-part question for you, and I apologize in advance for the overload of questions, but do you believe, and you touched a little bit on this in the beginning, that our society and our companies, specifically in Spain, that they have the will and the sense of urgency? Because the impact of the things you're doing now, maybe we'll see the decade from now, not necessarily on Monday. Do they have that will and the sense of urgency to act on the topics that we have been talking here and you mentioned as well in the beginning?
No, thank you, and I will also comment on some of your comments. Using data and to what extent the society is prepared and the decision makers are prepared to digest and understand the data. Because if we have the data but we don't have the capacities to apply in a smart manner those data, there is something that is missing. I think that the society has understood and bought the big headline. We need to act, we are experiencing the consequences of the changes, this is not good, we need to do things. I'm not so convinced on the two next chapters. First, this is very urgent. Whenever you get deeper into the information, it's scaring. And we don't want to scare people. We need people acting, not being scared. So here again, we need to identify the best ways to count on people acting, asking, supporting, demanding, but not just complaining or being scared. And the second thing is, what does this mean in terms of the changes you need to introduce in a very short period of time? So to what extent people is ready to act in a consistent manner. And this is where I think that the cultural change is also very important. And then the answers are not fully consistent. The more the people understand what it means and to what extent we don't know every single detail, but we know enough and we have sufficient solutions to be quite effective, the more committed and the more engaged the people react. But this is still an ongoing process. And it has to be reasonably easy. You cannot ask anyone to be a hero every single day of the year. We need to count on a context that facilitates the consistent decisions coming from any citizen. The second thing is what I was saying. I think that this has been so quick that the question marks on do we count on the skills we need? Are we ready to re-skill people that were thinking, myself too, I mean, I'm coming also from a generation that is still analogical more than digital. To what extent people have the capacities to play in a smart manner, or to what extent people that don't feel that have the capacities and the skills do feel scared by the change? This is important. Still is a cultural change, and we need to invest a lot to facilitate this transformation because the time is so short that we need to happen. And at the same time, when talking about the organizations, this is also very relevant for utilities, for companies and enterprises, but also for governments and administrations of any kind. Of course, we collect lots of interesting, amazing, very important data. And then the question mark is fantastic. I have the access to the satellites, I have the access to the everyday long series of data, so we know that we need to have the capacities to observe. We have the data, and then what? What does this mean? How prepared are the organizations to draw conclusions from those data, and to project what is smart to do, not only in the very short term, but also in the mid and long term? And secondly, how we share this information with others, because I think that this is a role coming from governments. If we have the capacities, the financial capacities to send a satellite, I don't know where, or to collect the meteorological information in a very detailed manner everywhere, this is relevant information for many decisions. So how we can share this information through open platforms and so on. But then how the ones being in a position to take the decisions can count on the right reading and assessment of those data to make the right decisions. And all of this has its own inertia. Now, for instance, we are trying to promote something that you have been talking a little bit about, which is how we can digitalize the water sector, which is key for a country that is going to be under huge stress because of lack of water or because of floods. We need to be much more capable, to be very effective and efficient when using the transportation infrastructures, the access to the final users of water. But I mentioned water, energy, and land. So thinking about agriculture, how much chemicals? Is it useful to pour water right now or not? To what extent? So I think that all of this goes through a process that needs to happen very quick. I think that there is curiosity. I have a strong sentiment of strength coming from the Spanish society, much more open than other societies, so to understand that, oh, this is interesting how we can learn, so less conservative than other societies when talking about this type of changes, but we need to facilitate these changes, even in sectors that probably have the experience of having a problem, but do not necessarily feel like being in a position to change the way they have been producing or solving their own problems for decades. So I think that we are in a very, very interesting moment, and it is very important to build this type of alliance, and I'm sure that yes, WeGo may have opportunities to do things on the water cycle, so to model and to understand what it may mean and how the early systems can operate and how the early warning system, and how the different decisions on how to combine and prioritize different final users or the time to introduce what is the most adequate for water and for energy. We need green electricity and we need green energy to produce hydrogen, and the consumptions may not happen at the same time, and we need to think how we can build grids not only through more copper, but be much more effective and efficient in the use of the infrastructure, something that has been very effective in the IT sector and is still quite analogical in the electricity sector. So it's not only fossil fuels, it is a materialized system that needs to be much less materialized, much more dematerialized, but much smarter.
Just very quickly, because our time is running out, I would just want to build on, you mentioned WeGo, and it's a good example, but this is a tech conference with a lot of startups and founders. Do you want to highlight maybe in the upcoming months or the upcoming year, any specific technologies that you are looking for? Maybe the audience, part of some of the audience is here also looking to hear about what's the priority in your agenda. Is there anything you can share in terms of technologies, type of technology you're looking for in the upcoming months?
I've been so candid that I started to say that I'm still analogical, so I'm not sure I can make a comment to respond to your question, but what I'm sure I can say is that yes, we are going through that process in how we can be much more smarter in the use and in the organization, including what it comes later, which is the smart regulation that can facilitate the change. And of course, these are realities that are very much interconnected. Sometimes we forget that there are other chapters, other phases that come later on that also have question marks to be solved. But this is happening, and this is happening in all the processes, in climate observation, so much more of meteorological data, but not only, in the transformation of the energy system, and that applies to your house, to the mobility, to the urban management, to so many things, in the understanding of the biodiversity capacities, good use of the soil or good use of the water, and in the way we produce and how we can combine different materials and where the materials may be and how performant they are. So I think that there are many strong needs of being much more allied, so building partnerships on this, that I'm sure that the audience, I'm seeing you, that the audience will have great ideas on that, and apologies for not being more concrete, but I'm not sure I'm
But I think
capable
it's good.
to-
You give good indications about the problems you're trying to solve, and that's the main thing. And then it's up to the startup founders to work the technologies for you. So thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Ion.
Cheers.
I think it was a really valuable conversation. And I just ask the audience to give an applause to our panelists.
Yeah.